Welcome to the Fire Phenomenon podcast. I am your host, Shane Hayes, and coming up on today's episode, Robert Grigsby Wilson. He edited both a feature and a short that is playing at Sundance this week. But first up, what I watched this week. I didn't get to watch much this week. I'm recording this intro slightly early. I'm going to be out of town this weekend, so really the only thing I watched this week was Godfather Part 2, the very obscure, no one's heard of Francis Ford Coppola's Godfather Part 2, the infinitely rewatchable. The Godfather movies always make me hungry. This does remind me, though, that if you haven't seen it or checked it out yet, Eve Babbitt's has a new anthology out of miscellaneous unpublished essays of hers called I Used to Be Interesting. And there's a really cool essay in there where she's in Godfather Part 2. She's in the Senate hearing scenes as an extra, a little featured extra, because she went to Hollywood High with I think Fred Caruso was the producer, one big casting guy in the 70s, and it's just great. First off, if you've ever read Eve Babbitt before, she's not necessarily a film writer, but she writes about L.A. very well, and she gives herself the reputation as kind of a Joan Didion, but not. But if you read her, she's definitely like a writer's writer. She's the writer. Speaking of writers, the one I always think of is James Salter. Even though the difference between the two of them is he's very chiseled, and while she's very chiseled in her prose too, she gives a sense of always being effortless. Well, anyway, in this essay, she talks about hanging out with Coppola in the 70s around this kind of Barney's Beanery scene. And she dated like Steve Martin, maybe Jim Morrison, but she dated Harrison Ford in the early 70s. And there's a really funny story in her biography where she finally sees Star Wars. And I don't think either she said it or her friend said it, because whenever Han Solo first came on screen, she goes, "That's my pot dealer." But she talks about the Barney's Beanery scene where everyone wanted to write a great American novel, very similar to what you would say with the expatriates in Paris. And she talks about Coppola probably did it. This is it. Coppola's doing it. And she talks very personally about Coppola and some really cool conversations. And it's just, I can't remember having read anything like about the making of Godfather Part 2 that hasn't been mythologized. If you've read about the making of The Godfather, you've heard the same stories over and over. Like, oh yeah, Coppola was going to get fired a weekend, and he hid in the bathroom, and was in a stall and heard crew making fun of it, and he lifted his legs, and he was trying to convince Robert Evans to let him keep stuff in, so he cut it to the bone, and Robert Evans is just like, you took the Italian food out of this or whatever. We've heard these same stories, and there's a real interesting neediness, and it was also neat for me just because Barney's Beanery, weirdly, I think it's a different location, but was the first restaurant I ate at in LA. So I did not get the sense that there was a literary legend around that. So anyway, check out Eve Babbitt's. Check anything she's written out. There's also a biography that came out last year called Hollywood's Eve, which is a inversion of her very first book by Lily Unlick. And I like, as much as I'm raving about Eve Babbitt's prose, and the biography is one of those biographies where there's so much love and enthusiasm in it that it's almost as good, if not better, to read something that than maybe I not go that far. They're both really equally great, but the biography equals a lot of E. Babbitt's writing too. So, Both are recommended. Robert Grigsby Wilson is on today's show. He edited a feature and a short that are both playing at Sundance this week, and I mainly wanted to talk to him just because I remembered my solo only trip to Sundance, and there was a lot of curious posturing on my part where I wanted to pretend I was old hat about it, but honestly, it was pretty wide-eyed, idealistic experience. Like, I couldn't even afford to fly in. I drove there, and was the best choice because I've never driven in the Rocky Mountains in the winter, and it was just positively majestic driving in. And I just wondered if Robert was going to have the same idealism going into. He's been to Sundance before. He's mainly been to the labs, but this is the first time a feature of his has been in there. So we don't know each other. At the top of the interview, we acknowledged that early on, and we spent a lot of the interview also just name dropping to see, do you know this person? Do you know this person? Do you know this person? And by the end of the interview, I hope you guys stick around, just because this is how editors talk to each other. It's a lot of the jockeying about where you are in your career and things like that. Things you assess whenever we're figuring out what kind of movies we should be doing or not, what kind of work we should be doing. It gets a very honest conversation between two editors. I hope you stick around and listen to it. I got a knock joke, or it's not a knock joke, but one of my editor friends told me this. How many editors does it take to change a light bulb?
How many?
Well, if you change the light bulb, then you got to change the ceiling around it, and you got to go in. You're just gonna have to start all over. Do you?
I wish that weren't true.
Do you? Your name Grigsby, Robert Grigsby Wilson.
Yes.
Grigsby was added because people were confusing you for a common name of Robert Wilson.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it came along pretty early on when I was just trying to set myself up on IMDb and trying to put my first entry up there, and I realized I think there was like 25 Robert Wilsons at the time, and I was like, this is never going to work. And Grigsby is my mother's last name, and always a little bit more differentiating than my generic waspy Robert Wilson name. So
so it's not even like your real middle name too?
No, it is. Sorry, it's my mother's. It's my middle name. It's my mother's last name. It's to make me a little bit more identifiable. Of course, now I just think it reads like I'm like some sort of British baron or something like that.
There's a weird thing of people putting their middle names into their credits, like especially when you know someone formally and then you see their credit on screen, you're like, oh, that's your middle name, especially in the movies.
Yeah.
I should backtrack. We don't actually know each other. This is actually formally our first time meeting. We are on a Facebook group of. Oh, you're just saluting me. That's cool. We are on a Facebook group of indie editors, and on that thread that I saw, you were one of the first people that mentioned that you had something at Sundance, and yeah. Well, first off, I had this conversation with a few other people. Do you know a bunch of people that got into Sundance? Like in your daily life, editors?
I mean, in my day-to-day life, I mean, the New York film community is pretty small. The editor community is pretty small. And so there are a couple people that are more reliable than others. But for me, it's my first time having a feature film that I've edited there. So it's a big deal for me. For some of my friends, they've been before. So it's maybe they're a little bit more like, But yeah. What is there a background to your question, do you think?
I was just in New York, and a friend specifically was complaining that he didn't know anybody that got anything in. He was more of a doc editor, and he was talking about certain things he'd seen rough cuts of that he thought were amazing, and he was annoyed that they hadn't gotten in. But he was just saying, and I mean, most of my community is Austin, but not thoroughly, so I didn't really know anybody from there, but maybe it's just me being a hermit. But so you've been to Sundance. You've been to Sundance before, though, for Director's Lab.
Yeah, so I mean, I've had for a while, I've had projects I've assisted on there before, or I've been an additional editor on something, or I'd cut a short film that was there in 2014. And for a while, I think for like 3 or 4 years, I had a project that I had worked on that was there. And then through the work that I had done as an editor, just in myself, cutting little indies, I got the attention of the Mankey Fellowship, which is a program, a year-long program that the Sundance Institute runs through the Director's Lab, where you apply and you're given all this mentorship, and then you're also invited to go edit at the labs. I did not get that fellowship, but it did put me on their radar, and because of that, they invited me to the labs to edit in 2017.
Is that in Park City?
It is not in Park City, it's at the resort, which is just down the street. They have screenings there as part of the festival, but it's so far removed from Park City that it's really a separate place to go. They're just like there are screenings in Salt Lake City during Sundance. There's also screenings at the Sundance Resort. But the Sundance Resort, like I said, is about 45 minutes away.
Were you there during winter, or was this a different time of year?
No, it's during the summer. So the Director's Lab happens during the summer. There are two screenwriters labs, and I'm not 100% I've got my facts right on this, but I will just attempt it. That they accept people through the screenwriters lab process that is happening actually right now, I believe, at the resort. So there are, I think, like 16 screenplays currently in development at the resort, and then they call that number down to 8 directing fellows, and those people are invited over the summer to come back and work with a production team that's brought out to sort of flesh out their ideas. It's not really meant in any way to actually end up in the film, but it's an attempt for these first-time filmmakers.
Well, famously, like Tarantino went to Reservoir Dogs with
yes,
the Sundance with earlier
yeah,
that they would shoot on videotape at the time. But
yeah, exactly. Now they shoot on like Sony A7s or something like that. It's yeah, and like P.T. Anderson and Ryan Coogler and Ben Zeitlin from Beasts of the Southern Wild and Miranda July, and like there's a long list of successful filmmakers that have come out of this program.
I know the other weird thing about
and
the resort itself. The year I went, the Redford gets all the directors together at the first and speaks to them right before the beginning of the festival. And I remember
yeah.
the director of my movie talking about that. But no, the thing I was
Oh, so you've been too?
Yeah,
You've been too?
I
I didn't realize.
I did a feature that was there in 2016, I think. It was in the next festival or the next part. No, I was
What feature was that?
It was called First Girl I Loved.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, the thing I was excited for you, which I mean, so I guess if you're in Brooklyn right now, is there snow on the ground in Brooklyn?
It just snowed, but because I'm just getting back from my honeymoon, I missed the snow.
Oh yeah, we should talk about the honeymoon too. But no, I just I drove up. I didn't fly in. I drove up, and it was a majestic drive. Much less once you get there, like just the mountain snow, like there, you just realize, oh, this is why everyone goes skiing there. Like there's the whole story where they moved it from summer to winter to try to get people from LA out to come out for skiing initially. But so
yeah.
All right, but you're there over 2 movies.
Yeah, this year I have a short and a feature at Sundance. The feature film, 40-year-old version, the director and I met at the labs in 2017. And when she got the money to take her film into production, she asked me to come along and edit it. And then the short film also came out of the Indigenous Peoples Labs, which is a smaller version of the Sundance Labs. That isn't what brought me to the project. I would just became like a word of mouth kind of thing. But then when I saw that, I, caught onto that and was like, oh, we have some overlap there in terms of our network at Sundance. And the director, Erica Tremblay, also is just a really great filmmaker. She is from Oklahoma, Native American from Oklahoma, and Seneca Cayuga. and
Okay.
has a very interesting story about her mom's experience growing up teaching kids on the reservation.
So it's autobiographical,
So
short.
yeah, semi-autobiographical, sort of about her mother more than about her, but it's a really personal story to her, and it's really nice. I really love both pieces.
I know the not at the detriment of Little Cheap, but I remember when I mainly went through the feature synopsis, and 40-year-old version sounded like an interesting
Hmm.
synopsis at the very least.
Yeah.
But well, I guess let's backtrack for exposition. Let's get some into first act stuff done. What? Where are you from?
I'm from just outside of Boston, Massachusetts. I'm actually from Concord, which is where Little Women takes place.
Okay.
Just because that's in the air right now as well.
We're gonna
I
split
grew
this
up
into
right
two
right behind.
timelines to go back and forth.
Yeah,
Yeah, because on your website you have that you alternate between L.A., Boston, and New York.
yeah, and that's about right. I grew up in Boston and grew up outside of Boston, and I went to Emerson in the city, and really liked it and thought about staying. But then when I went out to LA to visit some friends, I realized how many more jobs were out there, and so I decided to move there after I graduated. And I was there for about 8 years and working in post, mostly indie films. And I mean, I don't know how fast you want me to move through this, but I
No,
will.
not at well.
Like, started.
Going backwards. I was
Yeah.
like going like, what theaters did you go to as a kid?
Oh, in Boston.
Sure. Or just what do you
Uh,
remember? Do you remember? My big question I ask everyone: do you remember your first movie?
yeah.
What was it?
Well, my mother went into labor in a movie theater with me, which is a
What was
true
the
story.
movie?
It was Pennies from Heaven
Ooh, that's a
with
great
Steve Martin.
movie for that to happen
Yeah,
during. Oh, not to miss,
yeah.
obviously.
So there's
She was the
that.
one person that saw Pennies from Heaven in a theater, or half of it.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And then what was funny is that that was Steve Martin and Goldie Hawn, right? I'm getting that right.
No, it's
Um,
Oh my
it was,
God, I can't believe I'm forgetting her name. She's the great
yeah,
Broadway dancer. Bernadette
yeah,
Peters.
yeah.
Bernadette Peters.
Oh,
It's a
yeah. Oh,
Herbert
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's right.
it's a Herbert Ross
That's right.
movie.
Yeah.
It's just really
Yeah, and I don't remember what movie I first saw in the theater, but yeah, I grew up right down the street, walking distance from the video store in my hometown, and so I don't really, I think not remembering is just more indicative of the fact that I was always there. So it was and continues to be always my outlet.
what were the
Uh,
movies you rewound over and over, or we were watching over and over?
oh, it would be like, well, the movies that still stick with me are like Ghostbusters from when I was really young, and even some funny like little Disney movies and the Ralph Bakshi Lord of the Rings version and also like this movie Wizards, which he also did, which is just like so that like from a pretty early on age I was always finding the weirder movies I could get my hands on that my parents would let me rent.
Okay,
And then
But these are mostly video
and
store. These are almost all video store. Did you go to
yeah,
theaters much?
yeah, I did. I mean, there was a normal AMC up the road at the mall, but there was also a small indie theater in the next town over in Lexington, and there's a pretty decently sized landmark theaters in Kendall Square and Coolidge Corner in Brookline, and there's always like been little second run theaters all over the area. The indie theater scene in Boston is pretty strong.
It sounds like
So
it. I
yeah,
mean,
so
I'm jealous, super jealous. Do you remember the first movie that you figured out someone was making it?
I think, well, this isn't, I can't say for certain, but the first movie that comes to mind when I really like caught on to the craft of the story was Pulp Fiction, because I was 13, I think, when I saw that in the theater.
Okay.
And I was actually just recounting this for my parents, with my parents the other day, where we were all kind of shocked that they agreed to let me go see that in the theater as a 13-year-old. But I was completely taken with it, and the structure of the film was the thing that really got me. That I think I always knew that there were filmmakers, and I knew, I'd seen other films, but I don't think I really. Of course, I'd seen a lot of films and knew a lot about a lot of great filmmakers. My mother had exposed me to a lot of great films of Humphrey Bogart and whatever else I was willing to sit in front of and watch. But I think when I saw Pulp Fiction, I really started to understand that there's like a real craft to it,
Okay.
like a real structure that people come at it with a different approach, and I started to understand how you can, depending on the filmmaker, alter that approach.
Did you, whenever you were finishing high school and starting to go to college, were you planning on, were you going straight into editing? Was it just be a filmmaker in general? Did you want to write and direct?
I was interested in writing and directing, and I knew I really liked certain aspects of the process, editing being one of them. And I was always pretty good with computers, with the technical side of things. And I think Final Cut had just come out when I was graduating from high school. And I really sort of took to it. And I really enjoyed it. I liked every aspect of the filmmaking process. I liked writing it. I liked being on set. I liked directing actors. I loved editing. And then it wasn't until I got to college that I really realized that there were certain people that didn't like editing. There were a lot of people that found it tedious and monotonous. And I think as I was getting older and I was looking for a way to eat when I was graduating from college,
Okay.
I said, well, I kind of like this editing thing. Like, let me spend some time in this and see how it feels. And pretty quickly I realized, like, you know what? I actually, when I got to LA, my first job was on a little indie film, and I had a assistant director that I worked for that, let's just say, we didn't really get along. I don't think I really appreciated the on-set experience. And so I was like, okay, well, I've got that experience. Like, maybe it was just a bad thing, but let me go try out being a post PA for a while. And I sort of PA'd around and got put in different places and eventually landed at a trailer house in LA. And they got sort of stuck me in the machine room. And I didn't know how long I was going to be there, but I ended up being there for about a year and a half and running the machine room.
I still have nightmares about my on-set experiences. Yeah. Like, they're just, I remember I had some okay ones, but I just remember thinking, like, they're mean. They were just mean sometimes. Like, the funniest thing, I remember I worked real briefly in a restaurant, in the back of a restaurant. I remember thinking they were very similar, just because, like, everything, high intensity rush, a lot of hurry up and wait, and everyone was mean. So first off, your IMDb is bonkers. Like, it is all, like, there's so much.
That's very nice to say.
Yeah. So
yeah, I've been in a lot of different projects, is I guess what I would say. Yeah.
So you were at the trailer house?
Yeah, I was at the trailer house for a long time. It's called Buddha Jones, still exists. A lot of the people have moved on to other places, but I mean, I really think that they still are the best people in the business, and it was good for me for a while. But I didn't really want to do that as an art form. Like, the work didn't appeal to me.
Okay.
So I had been lucky enough to meet a couple feature film editors, and they started me on this path that now I try to send people on, which is like, well, you meet someone and then they recommend you to somebody, and then you talk to them, and then they recommend you to somebody else, and you talk to them, and you get lunches, and you talk about your career, and you talk about what you want, and talk about how they did it, and then you start to get insights from that, and then eventually a job comes around. And so I started post PAing. My first feature film cutting room was post PA on the Kite Runner.
Okay.
And from there I spent some time sort of at DreamWorks and spent a little time at Paramount and floated around doing a lot of post PA jobs, and then I found my way onto an indie tier 1 feature film.
Well, this has been as an assistant editor? Or?
Yeah, that was as an assistant editor. When I left the trailer house, so in LA, you may know this, but in LA, they have a union roster, which is basically you have to work a certain number of non-union hours. Yeah,
I can tell. Roster,
yeah. So I didn't realize until I was basically ready to leave the trailer house, when I was actually actively thinking about leaving the trailer house, that I had already accrued all the days that I had needed to join the roster, to get on the roster. So I was lucky. I think I was about 25 when I had already knocked that out without even really trying. And then, so I was on the roster. Then I just needed to basically make myself available and start getting some feature experience and start building my network.
Well, the fascinating thing to me is you're even as you started doing some established features, you're more so than especially anybody else on the thread, you're still doing assisting work. Do you enjoy doing assistant work?
Well, it satisfies a certain part of my brain, the same part of my brain that led me into editing in the first place. I think that there's a certain networking that comes from it. You meet a lot of really established directors, you meet a lot of really talented people, you spend a lot of time at some of the big facilities. You meet, talented colorists, you meet talented sound mixers, like you post supervisors, whatever. And so it's a good way to build a network. Also, everything that I had done up until this year as an editor was a non-union project. And I've been in the union for 12 years now as an assistant. And that was how I was getting my health insurance and
Well, I know most of the
stuck
people
with
on
it.
that thread are
Yeah.
typically they're keeping they're just eating their hours for their union hours in for that way.
Yeah. And that's basically the way I was working it for a while. But I just started to get more selective about the projects I was working on.
Okay.
And, now I'm sort of in the position where I try to target the projects that I worked on. If I'm going to say yes to something, it's because I'm interested in being a part of it, or I'm going to be. It's always like an interesting dance because we all have to eat, and even in a place like in New York, there still aren't a million opportunities. Like I'm not the first phone call for every indie feature, so you have to find a way to survive. And as you can probably attest, sometimes the money assisting on a giant Disney movie is better than the money you would get from cutting a little indie.
Well, there's something I get a little bit of it on indies, but when I was with I've only really had that experience early on in my career, weirdly enough. But there's something about proximity. Like you're just like people are going to see this. People have heard of the people that are in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
If you tell someone what you're working on, even if you were just like a PA on it, people are more interested than the indie that you put a lot of heart into, and but they've never heard of any part of it. But so when exactly did the LA to you went to LA to Brooklyn?
LA to Brooklyn, yeah. So in 2012, I moved to Brooklyn because my girlfriend at the time, now wife, got a job opportunity here, and so I chased her here, not really knowing what I would find when I got here. But actually, it turns out that the tax incentive that New York City had passed had just gone into place that previous summer, and so there suddenly was this huge influx of small features trying to find talented assistants, but because the talent base had not caught up with the tax incentive quite yet, there was a lot of opportunity for somebody like me who just was looking to find a job when I got here. And so, I mean, within a week of me being here, I got a job on Ain't Them Body Saints, assisting for Craig McKay, which was great. And
That's
then that turned into additional editing credit when I was here. And then from there, like my name just kind of got passed around pretty quickly. And because the network is a lot smaller here, you meet everybody pretty quickly. I mean, there's maybe a half dozen actual big facilities in town. And so if you work at a handful of them, all of a sudden you've met like a pretty wide swath of the people.
I know
Um,
my when I was just back in New York for Christmas, my friend kept telling me about these the various editors he's met at parties generally, and I my mouth kind of did drop slightly occasionally, but when he told me this, so when did you make the leap to features, the cutting your own feature?
so it started sort of by luck through meeting David Lowery and working on the Ain't Them Body Saints with Craig McKay, because David had cut the film with a previous editor and then started cutting the film himself in Final Cut 7, and Craig was being brought in to consult, but Craig can't use Final Cut 7. And so what they were looking for is an assistant to sit in the chair with Craig and David on the couch and be part of that process. And so it was a much more involved collaboration than other kinds of assistant responsibilities. And that pretty quickly turned into additional editor credit because the editing continued after Craig's involvement as well. And so
How long was he on
David and
it?
I don't remember exactly, but let's say a month or two. It's now lost my brain of exactly
Sure.
the chronology. It's not lost in time, but
How long was it with
we
you after he left then?
well, it continued through the finishing process, and then after Sundance, we recut the film again before it went to Cannes, and then I think we recut it again after it actually got released. So it was just a constant collaboration, and then David and I being in touch at least. But David is a great editor in his own right and doesn't need my help.
And he was
I mean,
around the
a lot of
circles in
things.
Austin a lot. Like
Yeah.
I had this cool story where a few years ago when I was projecting for the Austin Film Society, I worked for Brian Poiser, and I would do projections for dailies and stuff out there. And They wanted to run Shotgun Stories and Jeff Nichols' print of Shotgun Stories, and so
Cool.
it was David Lowery, Brian Poiser, and Andrew Bujalski, and to pay me that we all went out to dinner afterwards. And Lowery's just the nicest guy. He's such a sweet, nice guy.
No, he's the best. He's the best. Yeah, he's been super supportive, and he's definitely one of those people I would go to war for. I just think he's such a great talent, and also he just follows it up with great warmth, and he's always been very, very giving and very friendly. I mean, I'm sure that's what makes him a good editor in addition to a great director.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I think he's great. He was, from getting to know him, I was able to at least travel in a few circles. Like I talked to Kat Candler for a while, and do you know Kat from being around?
Kind of. I've met her a few times. My friend used to work. My friend Scott Colquitt used to work with her a lot, but way back in the day though.
When she was still doing shorts and teaching, or was this?
Yeah, that would have been it. I mean, it was after what I forget what her first feature was, but it was well after that.
Hellion.
Oh no, it was before Hellion. Yeah. She did.
Before.
She had like 2 features that were South by Staples before then, but
it
would. He worked on Hellion. I do remember that because I remember seeing that at South by.
Yes.
So
cool.
We're at Eighth and Body Saints. You get additional credit on that. When was the first full editor credit?
Well, I had actually had a full editor credit before that, but that was a very small movie that hadn't made it very far out in the world, and my friend was the director, and so I took the opportunity to work on it. So the post supervisor on Eighth and Body Saints really liked me and knew that I was capable of editing myself because I had spent some time with David doing it, and he had signed up to do this small feature here in New York that seemed like a great opportunity. It had Matthew Broderick, it had Janine Garofalo in it, it had Robert Forster, and I was looking for any opportunity to cut that I could find, and so that brought me into the biggest feature film I had cut at the time through working on Saints. And so that film was really great. I love it to pieces. The director and the writer are still good friends, and premiered at the Woodstock Film Festival.
What was the name of the movie?
So the movie was called The American Side, and just as a little side note, Jenna Ricker and Greg Sturr had gone on to make they just made a documentary that premiered at South by this year called Qualified, which is about the first woman to ever qualify for the Indy 500. And it got picked up by ESPN's 30 for 30 and is a great documentary. And so just dropping that because I love them and love that film. But then The American Side had a decent festival run. They actually crowdfunded a road show where Jenna and Greg drove around the country and did pop-up events at different theaters all around the country as a way to raise awareness, and eventually sold it to The Orchard, and it ended up on Netflix, and so it got a little bit of visibility. But it's getting harder and harder for little indies to break through. So I kept trying to find other opportunities, and it's just lily pad to lily pad, finding bigger projects to assist on. But then I also found my way through this is the way everyone's career goes, through working with Craig McKay. I had a producer who used to work with Jonathan Demme, had worked with Craig McKay on Silence of the Lambs, called Craig and said, I have no money, but I need a great editor in New York. Can you recommend somebody? And Craig recommended me this director, Laura Taruso, who had her first feature coming out. She was coming out of the NYU Tisch, and she had, through the process of being there, had met Michael Showalter, and the two of them had together written Hello, My Name is Doris together.
Okay.
And Michael's gone off and had an incredible career as a director himself, but Laura was still in grad school at the time when that movie premiered at South by Southwest. And so Laura was about to go off and make her first feature, and they didn't have a ton of money, but they had Wyatt Cenac and Greta Lee and Maria Dizia, and they had a great cast, and she's an incredibly talented writer, and so took the time and put in the work, and that movie ended up premiering at South by Southwest in 2017, I believe.
That is the first movie. When I was going through your IMDb, I know that's the first movie I saw of yours. I was at South by that year.
Yeah,
so.
South by is an amazing festival. That's the only time I've ever been. I just had an awesome time being there. I would love to go back.
It's
It's just
the one weird thing I was warned about South by versus Sundance distance, because I living in Austin, I go to Sundance every year, or I mean
right.
South by every year, South by every year.
Yeah, right. They're very different festivals.
Yeah, well, Sundance, I remember the funniest thing was that you get the badge, but then you still have to pay for tickets. And so you get first access to them, but you still have to pay for tickets. And I remember I was with some friends, and they were having me buy tickets, and I was really poor at that point, and credit card was really maxed.
Yeah.
So like it was just like,
Yeah.
guys, could you guys give me a little bit of cash for this one?
I think Sundance is an interesting festival. Not to sort of trail too much off the thread, but when you're at Sundance, you are trapped in this little town during the festival, and so it's I enjoy it in some way, but it becomes this very sort of melting pot where even if you're not in it, you're in it. And South by being in the middle of a city where you also have almost three festivals happening at once, right? You have the film
Right.
festival, but then you also have the music festival, and then you have the interactive, like digital side of the festival, all of which going on their own things. You have lots of people there to do things and be a part of a festival that has nothing to do, and they have no awareness of your corner of the festival either. And that made it really fun to have a badge to be able to go to see interesting talks. Like my girlfriend, now wife, she works in digital branding, and so we got to go see a lot of interesting talks that she was interested in, and we got to go see some interesting bands. I saw Lizzo play when nobody knew who Lizzo was.
Lizzo played that year.
Now, yeah, Lizzo played at on the NPR stage at
My
like 5 o'clock, and it was like I was like, that was the best
that
act
is
I've ever seen.
wow.
It was crazy.
Well,
Yeah.
the thing is,
Yeah.
like my first few years, I gave up on music. Like when I first got to Austin, I got a platinum badge just for giving like 20 hours of volunteer work. And
Oh, cool.
yeah, well, they did that for 2 years, and then the first or second year, and then the third year, they suddenly didn't do it after I'd already done the work. And even then, I was just like, you know what, film is nourishing enough here. There is so much FOMO with all in Austin in general, much less during South by. You miss like, did you
Yeah.
stay up till 6 a.m. to watch the Kanye show? And it's like, no. And after having waited in line for 10 hours, I'm like, no, I'm good. I saw like 4 good movies. No, the other distinct, the only similarities I know between the two is the satellite venues. The satellite venues. I remember I got to the point my year at Sundance, I got to see Manchester by the Sea, but only because I drove in.
Yeah.
I had a car and drove into Salt Lake City, and especially later in the week, that's the best way to see some of the movies. I want to rewind back just a little bit. Early up on your IMDb is a few "Everything Is a Remix" videos.
Yeah. Yeah.
I remember particularly the Kill Bill one.
Yeah, that's cool. Thank you for mentioning that. I mean, there's a lot of really cool things about this project. Kirby Ferguson is a really, really smart guy, and I think the world of him. And he's still out there making another web series right now called "This Is Not a Conspiracy Theory." But what was really funny is this was at the time where Twitter was more innocent, and I was just sitting on Twitter one day, staring at the feed going by, and I was following Kirby, calling the Everything Is a Remix Twitter handle, and it goes by, it just says, "Do I know any editors out there?" And I thought that the first episode was so good that I just like immediately messaged him and was like, yes. Within like 10 seconds of the post going up, I was like, yes, I'm here. Like, here's 100 things. Here's whatever I had cut at the time. Like, I will do whatever you want. And he's like, well, I have no money, but I have all these examples of Tarantino's influences for Kill Bill. Like, would you be interested in collaborating with me on this project? And I was like, 100%. Like, it was just sort of like a fun thing to do. He was like, I don't even know what you're going to come up with, but here's all this footage. And he let me just kind of poke around and experiment, and I would send him a few cuts, and then he was like, okay, great. And then we put it on the internet, and it's still to this day, I feel like one of the most watched things I've ever done. But of course, as you know, it's like I didn't get paid a dime for it.
Yeah, I came to it late, so like I don't think I watched it when it first came out at all.
Those are really fun projects, and I still am in touch with Kirby, and I think he's a great guy. Yeah.
I had one specific technical question. You had an additional credit on Mr. Robot?
Oh yeah. So this is part of the bouncing back and forth thing that you were talking about earlier. So I had watched the first season of Mr. Robot and still think it's brilliant. And I think Mr. Robot, just in general, considering that it just wrapped up, like I've watched every episode at least once. Like I think it's just a great show, and I think Sam Esmail is really like he's another guy I would definitely go to war for. But Mr. Robot is going to war, literally. It's like going to war. And well, sort of what happened is one of the editors on the first season was good friends with a lot of people I knew, former New Yorkers, then moved to LA, and they talked to me a lot when I was moving from LA to New York, and we all stayed in touch. And then when Philip Harrison asked them, like, do you know any good New York assistants? He just happened to get my name and number and called me up. And I had watched the first season of Mr. Robot myself, and I was like, this show is brilliant. And then when my wife was out of town, and then when she got back, I made her binge it, and I rewatched the first season again, and I was like, this show is brilliant. And then it just happened to get a phone call to work to be an assistant on the show, um, and so I knew when I was getting into it that I was going to be working on the first episode and the last episode, and I was going to be working with this guy who had worked with Sam a lot, who had cut Sam's first feature, and like I knew there's going to be a lot of opportunity there. But pretty quickly I realized that we were about to drown because it was Sam's first foray into directing the entire season.
Okay, this is season
And
2.
this is season 2. So
Yeah.
yeah, so let me
No,
yeah. So they cut the first season in LA, and then Sam decided he wanted to direct the whole season. And so they brought the editors and the post producer out from LA, and so that they knew that people that Sam had worked with and Sam had approved would be there. But they hired a local crew for the supervisor, coordinator, PA, assistant editors, and stuff like that. So I got signed up to do it. My good friend James Lesage, who was also an editor here in town, and my friend Gordon Holmes, all ended up working on the show together. So it was a great assistant crew. But because of they had allowed Sam to direct all the episodes, Block shot the whole season, but then they did not really move the air dates. They didn't consider that still isn't enough time, that you still only have one guy to be on set the whole time, and then like when is he going to sit in the editing room for days? And Sam really likes to take his time. He's really meticulous. He really makes season of television like a feature film. They didn't give us enough time the first go around, and so it was nights and weekends. We were on a shifted schedule Wednesday to Sunday, because the only days we could guarantee that Sam would be available to come into the cutting room was Saturday and Sunday. And so we were definitely there Saturday and Sunday. But then that also ended up, we were there on Monday and Tuesday to catch up on everything. So for a while we were just doing around the clock stuff. And Sam shot so much for the first episode, they split it into 2 episodes. And then when the finale came around too, they split it into 2 episodes. So I ended up being credited on 6 different episodes of a 12-episode season. And that led to me being able to cut a lot, because while they were cutting episode 1, I mean, episode 4 is not going to wait.
Well,
Air dates have been moved. So,
I should mention that I think it's second season, maybe third season, but I think it's second season. I know I deliberately was like studying it and ripping stuff off of it, like, and just because it's so, like you mentioned, meticulously cut. I always have this thing with TV, like especially when TV starts to get peak TV and it starts looking like a feature. Like I'm always amazed, like how much time did you have on that? I mean, you're working nights and weekends, you're working overtime.
Yeah. Let's see if I can remember how much time. I think we started around February or March, and the show started airing pretty quickly in July. But and then, I think that we were working right up until our air dates. So I think we were airing like July through late August or early September, I think is what it ended up being. And we were there, like we were delivering. Like if the show was airing on Wednesday, we were delivering on Monday, hopefully sometimes into Tuesday. So it was right down to the wire. So it got to the point where we would get a day off on Sunday before our air dates, because we knew Sam wouldn't be there because he would be at the mix. So that's kind of how it was.
Well, and it's a testament, because the shows don't seem sloppy at all. There doesn't seem like a lot of I don't know, maybe you guys recut some stuff after air or something, but
yeah, we were all very meticulous, and not to just because I know the guys like Philip Franklin and John, the editors on that season, were all incredibly talented editors, but it's also because we had James, Gordon, and myself, who are also all, they were all sort of, we are all sort of in the same place here in New York, where we're cutting indie features on the side, assisting when we can. We're all sort of doing the same sort of balancing act, and we just were there because we love the project, love Mr. Robot. And I would say that if there's any secret to it, it's that they really had six editors,
Fair
not in
enough.
title, but in ability. And we got to do a lot of really fun things on that season. Like that was the Alf 90s sitcom flashback
Okay, I remember
episode.
that episode.
And
I remember that
yeah,
one.
and they shot it all on beta and green screen. And so Gordon pulling keys had madness. And then they also, like, they had the VHS tape, the old VHS tape, which is where he was supposed to get the mask inspiration from. And what they did is they went out and shot it, and then James, who was one of the other additional assistant editors on that season, cut the whole show, and then took it and dubbed it to his VHS tape and redigitized it as a ProRes master and from his VHS, and that's the version that went to air.
That is
Um,
so
yeah,
cool.
so we had a lot of fun on that season, and look, the Sam is they went back to LA after season 2. They realized they pushed back the air dates. They reinvented their entire approach to post. That meant that it wasn't necessary for us to be involved, and unless we were going to move to LA, which none of us were in the position to do, like they went and brought in a new post team, and they are also incredibly talented. Rose Tankalella was just nominated for an Eddie for her work on the 4th season. But I mean, it's one of those shows that I'm just to have worked on one season of, I'm super proud of it.
Mm.
I love that show.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was gonna tell you specifically. There was the weird digitizing effect. I remember I was doing a lot of like two frame, putting in sound and messing around with sound, like trying to treat it like a Pixie song, like where you just like
Yeah.
constantly jarring people. But very, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've had this conversation with a lot of other editors, and it seems there's a wide gulf on this. But it sounds like I first started out working with a lot of editors. Like we would recut each other a lot, and
Mm.
I've had a lot of conversations.
That's Terrence Malick, right?
Yeah, and I've talked to a
Yeah.
lot of other editors who are so, and I've done it this way many times, but just work by themselves and can't imagine working with others. But it sounds like, are you in the former camp a little more, where coming up as a assistant, being properly mentored?
Properly, I was gonna say, like, properly mentored is like I'm putting that in quotes.
Okay.
They, I, I spent a lot of time also working recut jobs and stuff like that when I would work as an assistant, and I've still been around, and I still had my work recut, and I've still recut other people's work, and I, I do think our work is important, and I think our work is sacred, but I do think that there is a value sometimes to having a fresh set of eyes on the project. And I know that even for myself, sometimes I can get blind to what is and isn't working about a cut. And so I'd maybe sit somewhere in the middle where I don't, Terrence Malick, to use the sort of extreme example, as I've never been a part of any of his projects, but from what I understand, famously, he recuts things and puts it out in the world and recuts it again. And that I have no idea what that environment is like. And to some degree, I think that there is a law of diminishing returns where, I do think it's a truism that a film is never done, it's just abandoned, right? That
Sure.
sometimes you need to just put it aside and move on. So I don't necessarily need to endorse that, although I can't speak to that, only you can speak to that.
Right.
But the but I do think the idea of the editor as singular vision is not something I subscribe to either. I think that there's value sometimes in someone coming in and taking a look at your footage. I think, and this is no disrespect to any director I've ever worked with, but I think sometimes there's value as well for the director to come in and hear a third person who they have deemed accountable to the creative process. Let them come in and see if they have the same observations. I know I have been a part of projects where editors have stepped in after the fact and looked at something and gave a note that I gave 3 months prior. The director didn't want to
Yeah,
accept. But
that's always
but
the
then when they
frustrating
give,
one. Yeah.
they're a little bit more like, all right, maybe this time. And so I've actually won some battles with other editors making arguments for me. So I think
Oh,
that there is
totally.
value to it. I think there's value to it, but just like there's value through any part of, you can get that reward through any means. You can be the person with your hands on the machine, but like, you might get that note 7 times in the screening, or you might get that note by just bringing in a really established editor who will make the observation for you, and then you go off and do it. You don't have to give the film to somebody else to accomplish that. But I think that it's a collaborative medium, but politics plays a role.
Right.
Like, it's just, I say that it's 50% technical and 50% therapy, and so sometimes it
That was
just
a
helps to
hard
hear
lesson for me
something.
early on. Like I
Yeah,
remember one editor just like flat out saying it was psychotherapy, and it took me a second to be like, I'm here to make a good movie. Like it
yeah,
really, but I mean, there's also, I know sometimes in the atmosphere where there's a bunch of editors, you get there's this danger of getting overly protective of your work, the inherently finding value in your work and less in anybody else's, as a also as an extension of your ideas.
yeah.
I know on one movie in particular, I got to a point where the bunker mentality takes over in some editing rooms, and I we just started showing it to people, and because I was just like, look, I gotta admit, this is how I feel about it. This is how you feel about it. We need an arbiter on this, and
Yeah.
actually, I've done that in multiple movies, and that it was a helpful. It's been the way I've been doing movies whenever we have plenty of time on something. I just screen and screen and
Yeah,
screen every week, work in progress.
I totally agree.
Do you want to talk about your nonfiction work? Any nonfiction editing stuff?
You mean like some of my commercial work or stuff like that? How do you mean, when you say nonfiction? I'm just
I thought, or it's a few docs. I know I noted Most Beautiful Island because I remember trying to see that South by and not
oh,
being able to see that.
no, that's a narrative thing.
Okay.
Um, the no, I mean, I spent a little time in doc. I would love to spend more, but I think it's the best place for an editor to sort of like stretch their legs and work the muscles, because the editor really is the writer of the project. As but I like on a doc more so than on anything else. But I haven't spent enough time there, and I really, I hope I can. I mean, there's a project coming up in February that I'm hoping to be involved in as an editor, uh, but I'm, life is still sorting itself out in February. Like I said, I've been on my honeymoon, and now I'm going to Sundance, and I've barely had time to think about what I'm going to do next.
Yeah.
So
I'm
that's just how it is, lily pad to lily pad.
Well, I'm kind of surprised our circles haven't overlapped more, but I think a lot of it's
I
like
know.
when you compare nonfiction stuff. Some of the old Malik people went to a lot of them are in New York right now, and a lot of them are working in
Yeah.
nonfiction because a lot of the way the editing of the Malik movies worked is very similar to docs as opposed to
Do you
scripted
know
work.
Keith Phrase?
That's my friend I've been mentioning multiple times. Actually, he's the one
Yeah,
I just
yeah,
worked
yeah,
with in New York.
yeah. Keith and I met. So, speaking of being an assistant, Keith came in to work on this project that I don't think has come out yet, but it was called The Night Three Opened, or Once Upon a Time in Staten Island. I can't remember what the current
I
title
am
is
familiar with it.
right now. Yeah, and and
It's the
at the
Bloomhouse
time,
movie.
Oklahoma, yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I was looking for assistant work at the time because my other projects had wrapped up, and Goldie had wrapped up, and I was looking for union hours, and I was looking for a steady paycheck. And this movie called on Friday and said, "Can you start on Tuesday?" And I said, "Sure." And they hadn't hired an editor yet, so I didn't know anything about it. But I just started on that, and within a week or two of starting in, Keith got hired, and he and I hit it off. And yeah, so
I'm
he's one of those guys that does a lot of doc and narrative stuff, right?
Yeah, I think he mentioned you, and he mentioned you favorably. Yeah, he referenced you, I think, at one point when I was in New York. You
That's just
slipped.
because I slipped him $100.
Well
But
done.
he's a great guy, and
He's going to
I
be a
saw him.
future guest on the eventually too. Yeah.
No, he's super talented, and also has given me, since we met, like a lot of really great counsel about finding an agent, navigating in New York, this sort of delicate balancing act of when you're trying to just find your sea legs as an editor, which is for me, because I would love to never go back to assisting if that were really feasible. But I think who knows what's going to happen with any of the projects going into Sundance. 40-year-old version is not sold yet. No one has seen it. Like I have been to festivals before where you want the movie to explode out of the festival and shoot off like a rocket, but
Yeah.
you realize pretty quickly that that just isn't how it works. Like, I think I'm actually approaching Sundance right now with a decent amount of humility about the process, where what I'm hoping for is for it to shoot out of the festival like a rocket, but what I'm just trying to do is just go there and enjoy it.
That's
Because
very
I think
smart.
if
That's
you,
very smart.
yeah, it's like, because there's no cash prize at the end. The reward is just sort of the accolades and having people enjoy it. And like, I realized pretty quickly that it, like, you can get to the point where we are, where you may have an agent, you may have cut some movies that have played in some big festivals, you may think you really are an editor, but you realize pretty quickly that the switch does not just flip. Like, it's sort of it builds over time,
That's very well
and
said.
eventually, if eventually you find your name in certain circles, and you just, sort of, you float to the surface. But it doesn't just happen overnight, and it requires time, and it requires people seeing your work. And honestly, Fits and Starts premiered at South by, but it wasn't because it was on South by that it got any attention. It was because it was free on Amazon Prime. And I know a lot of people that watched it on Amazon Prime because they were just like, oh, I don't know, whatever this movie is, click. And then they watched it and they were like, that movie's great. And then they would message me afterwards like, I didn't even realize you cut it, but it was great.
I've had some
And
cool moments where someone came up to me after it went on streaming, and one movie I did on streaming, and I was just like, I thought no one saw it. I thought no one saw that movie. That was so cool.
yeah, yeah, I think it's one of those things.
So you said you were starting to get a little more choosy right now. If the prospects are there, what? I don't know. My friend made me watch the SAG Awards last night, and Brad Pitt at one
Yeah.
point said when he won something along the lines that you can never tell when something's going to be good. Do you have any metric or what you're looking for whenever somebody comes up with it?
I think,
There's this weird problem where sometimes you like a script. It's hard to explain to people because especially we've been weaned on this like EPK stuff of like a script's got to be good. It's hard to explain to people. Scripts are so abstract. You cannot tell if they're good. Sometimes you feel strongly about it, and that's going to make me good. But there are bad scripts that turn into good movies that you just didn't get. They weren't objectively bad, and then you
yeah,
find yourself like going to what if someone a recognizable name's going to be on it, and the careerist and you's thinking maybe that's going to lead to a boulder rolling down a hill, and I'll get more jobs from that. But
yeah,
I mean, it's just
yeah. I think it's everyone's got to eat. So I do, I have worked on things where, let's just say, like, I did spend some time working on the Nutcracker and the Four Realms, which is this little, which isn't little, it's a giant Disney movie. But, I knew that I was going to be like the eighth assistant when I worked on it, and they had very specific tasks that needed me to accomplish. And it was a little bit of a button pusher role, but I still was willing to take it because, like, it was decent money, and I liked all the people that were working on it. My friends were working on it, and I, like, was just happy to be there. So I wouldn't say that I exclusively follow this, but if I know that I'm going to put my name on something, that if it's going to end up on my IMDb profile, then I try to just say, if there's not a cut of it already, I do try and make the sort of careerist assessment of the project and be like, will it be seen? What is the built-in audience for this project?
okay.
Be it a festival, or be it, this person has already broken out of the festival. So, like, take for example, like The Lighthouse, which I just was a visual effects
I
editor on.
I was going to ask you about the
Like, yeah, so that, like, it came to me because one of the people who I had just worked with on Goldie, the feature I cut prior to 40-year-old version, he was also working on The Lighthouse. And I'd seen The Witch. I knew Rob's reputation was stellar, and because I had worked with Jeff Penman, the producer on The Lighthouse before, I knew he was a great guy, and he wouldn't be calling me if he didn't, you know, need me, right? So, like, I felt like that was a good project to be associated with, because, like, even if it's not great, it's A24, it's got a ton of indie cred. Like, we'll see how it goes, we'll see what leads to it. And, like, the more time I spend just traveling through different editing rooms, the more I realized that like it really is your network in some way. And so I figured like I'm going to work with somebody I'm going to work with this producer that I like. I'm going to meet a cool director who's a young guy who I like. I'm going to like socially. I'm going to work with a, you know, work at Harbor Picture Company, which is a great finishing house here in town. And I knew I was going to have a good time. But the thing you hope for is like, I just try to say like, is it going to be a good experience? Like that is really the thing that I try and decide on more than anything is like, am I going to like it? Right? Am I going to get it? Am I going to get through it? Like whatever my role is, big, small, medium, like are the people around me going to respect me? Are they going to be valuable? Like, am I going to want to be there? Am I going to want to get up and do the work? And
Do you have any like ways of
fortunately,
measuring
yeah.
if the crew or the director is going to be cool to work with? I mean, we all look
Um,
for like red
yeah.
flags all the time. It feels like, or I do.
Yeah, no, I think it's impossible to know until you get there, but I just try to make the best guess with judging my needs against the values of the project. And believe me when I say like I've guessed wrong both ways. Like
Yeah.
I've looked at something and said I don't want to be a part of that. That's too small a role. I won't say what, but last year there was a indie feature that they needed an assistant editor for, that the director was going to cut it, and they said we just need someone to come in and sync dailies. It's going to be pretty simple. No one's going to be looking over your shoulder. The money was fine, and I was like, honestly, but Goldie, the last feature I cut, had just premiered at Berlin, and I was saying to myself like, I'm not doing this anymore,
All right.
right? But I was saying like, well, maybe like I could turn this into like a co-editing thing or something like that. But I don't know. But I was just like, I'm not interested in trying this, and like there wasn't enough good stuff about it. And even though I thought the movie might be halfway decent, I didn't. I just kind of blew it off. And then the movie is, let's just say, it's completed a very successful festival run and is headed off into like a nice theatrical release. And if
I think
maybe that,
you're gonna have to
yeah,
tell me the movie after I turn
yeah,
off the
we'll
record
talk. We can
button.
talk about it. We can talk about it afterward. But then I've also signed up to be a part of things thinking everything looks great, and then I get there and I'm just like, this is a painful.
Hmm.
Like nobody values my presence. I'm not. It's not worth me sticking around, and like I'm bored.
So,
Like hopefully in that case you're at least getting paid well.
well,
Yeah, that's
yeah.
always the balance.
No, the what
Yeah.
I always use the freelancer three things. I think it was Neil Gaiman first said it, but it was I heard it from him. But it was you can get it good, you can get it fast, you can get it cheap, and you get two of the three.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I say it's people. Is it people? It is like people pay in project. It's like you want
Oh,
two. That's sort of
right.
the from the
Two of the three in
thing.
that.
It's like 2 out of 3. It's like you like the people you work with, and you're gonna get paid well, but the movie is shit.
Okay.
Or the movie is great and the people are great, but the money is shit. You know what I mean? Like it can go.
Right.
It's always kind of
It's a
something like that.
balance.
Or the people suck and you get paid really well, and the movie's gonna find a life. So you just kind of you always have to figure out you have to balance your needs with what you think you want to be working on. You know.
I should I have one last question just because I can't let you go without asking about I love Miranda July a lot. I wanted to know what your experience was
So,
like working with her.
I think Miranda is the sweetest. I was so privileged. It was pretty early in my career when I was working with her, and it was like I'd seen Me and You and Everyone We Know, and I loved it. And
Just got
we were
announced to
working
be
in
on
my
Criterion too.
yeah, yeah, and we were working in my neighborhood in Silver Lake where I was living at the time, and working on the future I thought was just great, but it was still like a weird situation because they didn't have enough money for an avid for the assistant the whole time. So I was doing night shifts while the editor was cutting with Miranda during the day, and I was coming in and doing like outputs and stuff like that until like midnight. And so, it always started. This is like little indie tier. It was a tier zero, I believe, which is like, I was not making a lot of money, but I was at least getting union benefits for it. And um, actually, funny story. This is sort of I found my way onto that project because my neighbor was the post supervisor. I didn't even know that at the time. Like I just was like this woman who I was talking with, who is a very successful post supervisor producer in LA now. Like at the time, she was just sort of starting out. She was just this nice woman that I would like talk to down
Um,
the street, and she's like, "Hey, like, you're an editor and an assistant, right? And I was like, yeah. It's like, do you want to work on this Miranda July movie? And I was like, what? Like, so I did get an opportunity to spend some time with Miranda. I got to spend some time with John Bryan, which was really cool.
Ooh,
And
that sounds
because he
cool.
because he was working the same schedule as I was, because he seemed to like, he would get up mid-afternoon and work till like the sunrise. If I would have a turnover, and then I would go and drop it off at his studio in, I think, Burbank or something like that, at like 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and they'd all be awake, and like Miranda would be there, and everybody would be like hanging around, because John is nocturnal. So it was really super rad, and
I saw him at the
he
Largo a few
performed.
years ago doing the
Yeah,
most
I was gonna
amazing.
say.
It was like a 20 or 30 minute show where it started out. He had a repeat pedal or something, but he just did every instrument, and the piece just builds and then dropped down, and it was one of the coolest things I've seen live.
Yeah, the John Bryan Largo shows are legendary, and like my wife and I, when we were in LA, like we'd go to shows. She grew up there, so she grew up going to see, like, Kanye and Fiona Apple, and seeing John Bryan perform like at the sort of height of it before he even moved over to the Coronet, where
Okay.
he performs now, the old Largo. But okay, so because I was working on the Miranda thing, the editor at the time who finished the movie, who is also a good editor, Madeline Gavin, she just cut loose,
Okay.
and like, it's like a really successful New York editor. She had to go back to New York, and Madeline wanted to take the scene that they had sort of like cast aside during the process of making the film, and turn it into like a little short film. And so Miranda called me and said, like, will you cut the scene with this sort of approach? She had sort of like imagined it as this little like short film called The Handy Guide for the Easily Distracted, which is this little like into this little instructional thing for her process as a creative. And it's just a joke. It's a very Miranda scene.
I
It's
just
like
watched it like
involves.
about half hour before recording this. It's funny.
Yeah,
It's
it's
it,
so
it
it's so funny. It's so Miranda. And like, so she came over and sat like I didn't have anything, but I had a little setup, had a little TV and my laptop, and she came over and like sat on my bed, and we like cut the thing. And I was just sitting here, I was sitting there with Miranda, like sitting on the bed in my bedroom while we were editing this thing, being like, I gotta get an office or something. Like, I can't do this. Like, you look like you have like a very nice setup from our Skype call. And at the time I was just so like in my own head about my setup. And so now you can't quite see it. I'd have to turn the camera around for you to be able to see it. But now I have like a couch and a TV and
oh,
more of a setup, because I'm just like, I can't bring people over
I
and like
had to
let them
move to the
sit on my bed.
Midwest to do this setup here.
Yeah, tell me about your setup. Like, so you left Austin, right?
Yeah, basically after the I don't know. I think what you were talking about earlier about the light switching. I think I expected that, and I had like three features did in L.A. Austin, L.A., and I got massive burnout, and
Yeah.
so a friend was offering me a reality TV gig, and it was better pay than I've made. I still really don't make much money on it, but it was better pay than I ever had, and it was long, and it was really
Hmm.
it was anonymous. I got to use a pseudonym, and so
Yeah.
I did that for like about 2 or 3 years, and
Yeah.
and I probably would have kept going, but it looked like that wasn't going to continue on. So then I was just like keep my cost of living and just go back to working in New York and L.A. And I worked for the first time last month back on a feature. It was with Keith, and I was just helping him
Hmm.
out.
Hmm.
They had a crazy schedule, and he needed just an extra set of hands. And I'm still informally helping them out, and I
Hmm.
really felt like it's just a muscle I haven't used in a while, and I started missing it. So I'm kind of thinking about trying to dip my toe back in, but it's not. But it's weird just because it's not like I. The only way I turned down movies was when I was working consistently there. Like it wasn't like I don't really turn down movies, and like I got a few calls after the
Yeah.
Sundance movie, but and I had one movie I really wanted, but for the most part, the movies I was getting offered, I was like, I didn't get it. Okay, and it wasn't.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just don't know where I'm at right now. I
Yeah.
mean, everyone.
Well, what do you think? How are you finding being in the Midwest as like a place to find opportunities, or what is it like, or like tell me about the quality of life things, because like I'll tell you, I live in a shoebox in New York, so I'm a little jealous, you know.
Well, it took me a long time to come to the conclusion where to stay because Austin's not that expensive. I could have stayed there if I thought I could have kept working there, but I kept trying to find the place where it would make more sense to go. And so, well, my family's here. I'm from the so like they'll be
Yeah,
here forever. So that made the sense. And I was really getting desperate to buy. I was getting
yeah,
sick of renting and wanted extra room. So that was pretty much the logic there. I do every once in a while get paranoid that like because if I'm not in a big city going out like grabbing drinks with somebody that I'm not consciously on someone's radar. But at the same time, it also led to doing this just because I can randomly still talk to people and feel vaguely connected, even if only by a Skype connection.
yeah. And I think that the world is getting smaller and smaller, and like the more I talk to people about what is editing gonna look like in 10 years, I think that it's very easy to believe that we will be able to maybe not, I don't know about move where everybody can move to the Midwest, but like you might get to the place where like people are moving farther out of town, people are spending more time working remotely. Like I do think the sort of like culture around being in a chair at a desk,
Well, had you
like
ever worked
where,
remotely?
so I mean it always comes and goes, because like especially now, like everything, it's have gun will travel, like you can go anywhere you want and still do work. So even if I like have a place to work, I can still go home at night and keep working, or I can be on vacation, or I have to be somewhere, and I'm like, we'll do this thing, or the director themselves like has to travel for 2 weeks. They've got to go to LA, and I keep working, and then I send them cuts. Like that's still kind of working remotely, unless you're sitting in the room with the director. It is sort of, I guess, by definition, working remotely. And I'm sort of in this funny place where like I feel like there's value to being near New York, but like, do I need to be like a 20-minute subway ride from the cutting room? Like, I don't know. Like, am I giving up the opportunity to like have a life outside of the city with trees and air and
The
hikes and less traffic?
the big paranoid feelings I have are more about getting jobs because the thing that
Yeah.
also this trip back to New York was really illustrative about and very helpful was I really am getting the best of both worlds. Like I got to hang out in New York for just a few weeks, and it just felt like I was living in New York for a while. I was in Manhattan for most of the time. I was in Red Hook for the other half
Nice.
of the time. But at the same time, I know what my time off is like and how long my time off can be. And so I was just like, oh yeah, I couldn't
Yeah.
afford my time off in New York. I can come back to the Midwest and the cost of living is so low. And I can fill my
Yeah.
time doing my own stuff or hanging around with my family too.
I have a friend, she's a very good friend of mine who is a trailer editor. Her name is Haley Thompson. She has worked for a long time at a lot of different facilities here and in LA, here in New York and in LA. And she went back, spent some time near Aspen, where she grew up, and met a guy, got married. They bought a house in like way out in Eastern Oregon. Like that's where she lives. But her mortgage payments are so low, and like he has a job. I think he is a professor at the local university, so they have like a very stable life out there. But she was always a really talented trailer editor, and so she is either able to be subcontracted out by facilities where they will just like send her a hard drive, and she does all her work remotely and uploads cuts from her house where she pays nothing to live, or she flies, like right now she's in LA working at some one of the big guys. I don't remember which one, but one of the big trailer companies. Uh, and she'll go out there for 2 months and make like 6 months worth of living
That's
expenses,
that's
and then she
exactly
could
where
go
I'm at
back
right
and
now.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah. So it's a quality of life thing. I mean, I think that to some degree, working in narrative, you have to be in the room. The political side of things, you need to kind of be there. But I do think we're getting to a point now where just talking like we're talking is most of the way there, where you are
Well, what changed things
communicating.
for me was I did a few films remotely. I had worked two movies that were made out of Mobile, Alabama, out of all places. And the second
Ooh.
one, they put me up the first time. The second time, they thought they were going to save money, and so I cut the assembly at home. And ever since
Hmm.
then, I've had a lot of weird experiences where I've done this. I remember one of the movies I did before this last New York trip. Um, my friend, I edited a movie for my friend. He brought me out to New York, and then I showed him the system of how to share Avid, a project with each other as long as we had our cloned hard drives. And
Yeah,
he would edit from his apartment. I'd edit for the place he set me up, and then he went back. We moved to LA, but he went there almost like a month before I did, and so
yeah,
we remote cut that way for like a long
yeah,
time. And you're the biggest thing I found I'm worried about is it's that pulling off the band-aid of getting to know a director and then show your first cut. That's always the thing.
yeah,
You need to know what they like,
yeah,
and, what they don't like, and getting to know them and stuff like that. That's the biggest part of it.
yeah,
But I don't know. I mean,
yeah,
it's an ongoing project still.
yeah. And I think like going to, and the other things too. It's like getting breakfast in the morning, getting lunch, talking to them while you're taking a break, like the developing a rapport is really best done in person.
Yeah.
And and there's a lot of things that get lost in translation when you're trying to be judicious with your communication, like over email or text or even over like a Skype call like this. So I do think that there's value to being there, but does that mean that you always need to be there, especially during an assembly? Like I could have done that. I had a great assistant editor on the 40-year-old version, Sam Salvadon, and Sam, if Sam hadn't been in the room right next to me, where we could bounce ideas off each other and bounce through, talk about workflow and talk about like how the cut was going, and I could show him things and get his immediate reaction. Like that, I wouldn't want to replace that. But does that mean it has to be in New York? Like, not necessarily.
Yeah.
But I think life will point me in the path. But right now, like I love my neighborhood and I'm not trying to leave Brooklyn. I love it here. But
But
as
it
you
sounds
know,
like
it's
this
really,
question is really weighing on you right now, or it's something you're thinking
yeah.
about.
It's just something. It's just something to think about, and I'm really curious about people's experiences living in other places other than New York and LA. People from LA are like, "How do you even find work in New York?" And I was like, "It's actually pretty easy. Not It's not easy. I don't want to oversell it,
Right.
but
Right.
it's like, it's a small, like I was saying, like it's a small network. And so if you meet a few people, the odds that you're going to hear about something, be it a cutting job, assistant job, whatever, are a lot greater
Mm.
because it's not like in LA where there's just a sea of people. Here it's like there's a, I say it's like depth versus breadth. As there's a quality of project that happens here. Like there will be a $2 million, $200 million Disney movie. It's like In the Heights is here right now, right?
Okay.
And my friends are working on it. So and that's going to be a huge movie when it comes out. But there's only like one In the Heights, right? Versus LA, where all the other examples of that are being made, West Side Story and whatever. That's all in LA. But so you can work on a Disney movie, you can work on a giant movie, but like if you don't get the job on that giant movie, there's not a ton of other giant movies to go around. That's
Okay.
sort of what I'm saying. You should come through New York, and you and Keith and I will go get a beer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No. Back to what you were saying earlier about just being in the other room. It was so much fun working with him again. I hadn't worked with him in years. But lastly,
Yeah.
speaking of life changes and rethinking things, how was your honeymoon? And congratulations, getting married.
Oh, thank you very much. It was amazing. At the risk of boring people, I we went to Tanzania to go on a safari and then go to
So
visit
boring. So
Zanzibar.
boring.
Yeah. And well, I just mean, it is unlike anything else I've ever seen in my life. I've never been to Africa. I have no experience with anything about what I went through. I didn't know anything about the people. I didn't know anything about the country. I didn't know anything about the topography and the way the animals interact. But it was like it's just kind of amazing to drive. Like I'll just sort of like tell one story. So there is a conservation site. It's not a national park because there's still people that live there. There's a nomadic people called the Maasai who still live in this conservation area called Ngorongoro, and it's basically a crater where there's a prehistoric mountain, like a volcano exploded and leveled everything and became this sort of like bowl of wildlife. And you can drive down there and see it's sort of this enclosed ecosystem where you have zebra and wildebeest and lions and elephants and rhinos and giraffes and everything just sort of living in this like bowl, and they're all surviving off the land, surviving off each other, but surviving off the flora and fauna. And it is just this completely, it feels like you're in a fishbowl and you can't be living in real life, but it is just this like perfectly preserved ecosystem. And we drove down, you drive down, all the hotels sort of, there aren't many hotels, but there's a few hotels that line the top of the crater looking in. And so you could see it, sun rises over it in the morning, you're looking out over it, and then you drive down, and like we drove down and parked the car because we had to put the top up on the safari car. And so I stepped out of the car for a second and like stood on the ground, and it's like there's a zebra, there's like a million zebra, there's a million wildebeest, there's like 3 lions hunting a elephant, there's 4 rhino. It's like it's just like nowhere I've ever been. And it's like sort of awe-inspiring because you just feel like you're like nowhere you've ever been in your entire life. And it was like that for me. So I'm doing good. I'm still jet lagged. I'm very much still coming down from the process. You're the first person I've talked to about it since I've gotten back. So I'm still definitely like buzzing.
Well, here I was excited for you going to Sundance, but you also be dealing with a lot of the sworn predators coming in from LA. Yeah.
No, I'm leaving one high, I'm coming down off one high, and I'm just ramping up to another high right now. You're catching me at a particularly happy Rob right now.
That's really cool, man. Well, Robert Grigsby Wilson, thanks for being on the podcast.
It's been absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me, and I really appreciate you letting me blah 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 about everything.